Okay guys, in this video we're going to be comparing the Beyerdynamic DT770s, 880s, and 990s. Now this is a lot of information. We're going to be looking at fresh and worn ear pads because they change in sound considerably over time. And I want to get through this as fast as possible, so let's get started. So we're going to be comparing the Beyerdynamic DT770, DT880s, 770s, and 990s. Now the 990s are open back, which is why you see these grills. The DT770s are closed back, which is why it's, solid color like that. And then the DT880s are semi-open, so you can see the little holes versus the grills versus the complete isolated sealed off sound. Now we're gonna go ahead and upload my target here. And the target is just, what a headphone is supposed to sound like on the frequency response. The in-game target, I'm going to flatten diffuse field here. And this is basically what the headphone is supposed to measure like. A 10 decibel warm boomy bass, a 3 kilohertz ear gain scoop, diffuse field level treble, So, we're not going to talk about that. But what we're going to start, putting on these headphones. So we're going to look at the DT990s with fresh ear pads, the DT990s, the DT880s with fresh ear pads as well, and then the DT770s with fresh ear pads as well. So this is what they all sound like fresh out of the box. We can see that, funnily enough, the closed back DT770s in yellow here actually sound extremely thin out of the box because they have this huge 200 hertz scoop as well as this 100 hertz scoop. So the DT770s in gold yellow here, they actually sound very thin in the mid bass. So we can see the target is way up here, but they actually sound very thin because they scoop out the mid bass. So the closed back actually sound very thin out of the box, but then it goes back up in the sub bass. So the DT770 closed back have a really strong rumbly sub bass out of the box. That's way up here. It just sounds thin in the mid bass, but it's really rumbly in the sub bass compared to the other two headphones that roll off the sub bass. Now the DT770s also have a horrible 4 kilohertz cut problem. They give really prominent around 5 to 7K, and then they kind of drop off in the high treble air. So the DT770s, yet again, the problems they have, thin, wobbly, wonky, warbly mid bass. They have this huge 4 kilohertz cut, which adds a lot of nasty coloration, throaty, gaggy upper mids, where vocals are. They're very prominent around 5, 6, 7K, and then they start to have holes in the upper treble and air. Okay. When we look at the DT880s, let's go ahead and look at the DT880s now. Fresh ear pads, DT880s fresh ear pads. They're the most muddy in the mids in red. So these don't have much impact, much dynamics, because they're kind of warm and muddy and muddled bass. So the mid bass and the sub bass is supposed to be more prominent than the mids. Okay. But on the DT880s fresh out of the box, the mids are just as prominent as the mid bass and the sub bass. So it starts to roll off the mid bass and the sub bass, and it's very prominent in the mids, which means you lack clarity and punchiness. So a prominent mid bass and sub bass and a thinner mids creates a punchier, thinner, yet more impactful bass. So you get a lot of impact and rumble in the mid bass and sub bass, and then you get thin clarity in the mids. That's what you're looking for. But the DT880s don't do that. They're a bit more warm, muddy, and muddled. because the mids compete with the mid bass and the sub bass. They also have a huge amount of 6K peak fatigue on the DT880s fresh out of the box. And then they roll off some of those high treble and air frequencies like the DT770s, as we can see. And then when we're looking at the DT990s in green, the DT990s in green, we're going to isolate all this. The DT990s in green, they have good mid bass. They have that nice thin mids that we're looking for on the DT990s in green. But once we get into the treble, that's where we have some real problems. They have that same 6K peak, but they also have a 8K peak, as well as some high treble air zing. So these four peaks make them very fatiguing at 6K, very zinging, in the air frequencies, a lot of snake cymbals, like pss, pss, pss. 6K is more just upper mid fatigue, so it's not really treble sibilance per se. But you do get this harsh sheen, metallic sheen with the DT990s out of the box. So we can look at them one by one and kind of see, okay, we see the treble is really bad on the DT990s out of the box, very peaky. We look at the DT880s, we could see, okay, they're muddy in the mids, 6K peak, they kind of, roll off some of the high treble, and they don't have a lot of bass, mid bass and sub bass emphasis, and then we look at the DT770s, thin mid bass, subwoofer, rumble, 4K cut problem, some of the holes in the upper treble and air. Now we're going to go ahead and get rid of these. And we're going to start to look at them with worn ear pads. So we're going to get the DT990s with worn ear pads. Change the color. We're going to get the DT880s with worn. So this is what they're going to sound like after you start to use them for quite a few months. They're going to start to sound like this, what we're looking at here. So they're changing in sound dramatically after a few months. And this is what they're going to end up sounding like. So when we look at these three headphones now, one of the most striking things is, like, where'd all the bass go on the DT880s? The DT880s, all the bass, all that mud in the mids is gone. All that mid bass and sub bass is gone. And we can see the treble just goes downhill big time. So let's just isolate the DT880s so we can look at that better. So when we look at the DT880s, with worn ear pads, they have very thin bass, and they start to get dark in the treble, but they have this, 6K peak fatigue, okay? So they start to have this 6K peak tone, like they always have, but they start to sound darker in the treble, and they don't have enough bass emphasis. So you get a very thin, mid-range focused headphone, no bass, no treble. The mids are where they're supposed to be. You can see the mids, the upper mids, they're where they're supposed to be, but the treble, starts to fall off. The bass starts to fall off, and we can see like comments online like this. No way worn pads will be very shallow, and this will significantly reduce treble quantity and the frequency response not compromise seal, the latter of which would lead to less bass. So no matter how many times you clean them, that will not restore the foam. So snag a new DT990V. That is what is used on the 880s as well. So the DT990s and the DT880s use the same. But, bass and treble loss is what we're seeing. A loss of dynamics, a loss of, energy, very lifeless sound, dark, muffled, thin, no power to bass. And then we look at the DT990s. Okay, so what happens to the DT990s? The treble smooths out significantly on the DT990s. What happened to all those peaks and harshness? It's a lot smoother now. It's very open and clear, all the treble information. You get this nice treble bubble, okay, like it's supposed to be. You get much more, sub bass, mid bass with the DT990s, and you get the same quality mids. You no longer have this 6K peak problem. So you just get a much more dynamic, bright, open, clear, smooth treble with the 990s. You get much more powerful, impactful bass. You get much more dynamic. It's much more V-shaped, The highs and the lows are not rolled off anymore. And you get a smoother upper mids. So yeah, the DT880s are known for being more neutral, quote, quote, which means more lifeless, more boring. The DT990s are known for being more V-shaped, fun, so we can see that kind of bass and treble emphasis for fun, which, it's just a better sound. And then we can go ahead and let's compare the DT990s to the DT770s with worn ear pads, okay? So we can see the DT770s, the closed back headphones. They now, they're still thin in the mid bass. That has not improved. They still have a little bit more sub bass emphasis. They still have that 3.5, I think it used to be 4K cut problem. They still have a 6K peak. They have a little hole in the treble bubble around 10K. So, you get much more wonky, warbly, or thinner mid bass on the DT770s. You get a little bit of subwoofer rumble, which is kind of hilarious, considering the mid bass, the warmth, the body of the sound is completely ripped out and wonky. Again, you get more coloration problems in the upper mids. You get 6K coloration and 10K coloration cut problem. So all you have to do is kind of trace over this. You'd be like, okay, sub bass. Oh wow, the mid bass is wonky. Okay, the mids seem pretty good. The upper mids kind of cut down. There's some 6K peak. It cuts down again, goes back up. So we got more deterioration here. And then when we trace over the DT990s, we're like, okay, it rolls off the sub bass. I can see that it's got a lot of mid bass. The mids are where they're supposed to be. The upper mids, goes down a little bit more than it should, but it's fine. The treble, oh wow, okay, it's much smoother. So I traced over that, and it's smooth as shit. And that's how it sounds: slick, sweet, and smooth. Okay, so that's the reason why I recommend the DT990s. We can see they follow the target the best. Then you can get yourself some EM6Ls, which are in-ear buds. So the SimGot EM6L have a very similar sound. They roll off the high treble and air a little bit, so they sound a little bit more dampened, while the DT990s kind of boost this region, so they sound more shimmery, more sparkly, more musical, to be honest. While the EM6L sound like they're in a dampened room a little bit, so it rolls off the treble air a little bit, so they sound a little bit more dampened, while the DT990s sound more airy and sparkly and open sounding. And then when we get to the sub bass, we can see the EM6L, since they're isolated, they're much more subwoofery, rumbly, and the DT990s kind of roll off the sub bass because they're open back. They don't isolate the sound. They don't trap in that deep rumbly bass. So we can see a little bit of difference in the bass extension as well as the treble extension, but besides that, they sound basically identical. So that's the reason why I recommend these two things. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. I hope you enjoyed this video, seeing the comparison between the DT770s, 880s, and 990s. Transparency-wise, tonality-wise, you can't beat the DT990s with worn ear pads.